Welcome. So I just mentioned that Representative Wattenberg will be here in a few minutes. And we have President Sutter off camera and my co-host, Representative Patterson, also off camera.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. So let me actually put the agenda in the chat as soon as I get my notes up. Sorry about that. Actually, I have the long version, which isn't going to look so good in the chat. So did you just do that? Thank you, Darren. That's awesome.
You're welcome.
Okay, so some updates. First, I don't have any updates myself. Did anybody else have any updates related to accountability and assessment? I think we also wanted to talk about whether we might want to meet in person during this opening time, but is there anything else that folks wanted to bring up? Okay, so it came up at our admin meeting, I think this week, that some committee, or I guess all of the SBOE committees are going to be considering whether or not to meet in person. So that is a conversation we can have. I have my thoughts on it, but I would like to give others the opportunity to speak if they have thoughts.
Thank you.
Madam Co-Chair, if I may chime in, I'm all for meeting in person as long as it's after my duty day at my day job. I'm okay with that. And I sent a message to the committee regarding the time frame that I would need if we were going to meet in person.
You sent the committee something today?
I responded to an email that we said we were going to be speaking to this, and I kind of laid out exactly how it would have to work for me. So it was just responding to an email that you sent that this would be on the agenda.
Got it. Representative Reed, did you have any thoughts?
I'm not interested in meeting in person. No, we have a lot of other committees, and then I know just with our public meeting, we're possibly going to go in person. We do a lot of in-person events. I also think this makes it somewhat accessible to other members to participate and jump in and out. So no.
Okay. Representative Wattenberg just joined us. She has her camera off. Can you hear us?
I can hear you, and part of the reason my camera is off is I'm not allowed to turn it on. So
okay, that will be rectified. Go figure. While we're waiting for that to be rectified, we're talking about meeting in person, and Representative Patterson just said that he would be open to it and has provided times he could meet. So I think it might mean changing times. And Representative Reed has said she's not interested. What are your thoughts?
Well, boy, that puts me right in the middle, huh? I guess in principle, I think meeting in person is important because I think it's just easier to understand each other and reach sort of some consensus on it. That said, you know, I heard the last part that Carlene said. You know, I mean, if she can't come, that's a problem. So I guess, look, I'm for them in principle, but but if we can't all be there, then it's not useful.
Yeah, I guess for me, why do I have echo? I agree with Carlene. I feel like it doesn't make a ton of sense for 1 hour out of our day to all converge in this one place from wherever we are in the city, unless there is a really good reason, like unless it really does change the dynamic in a positive way, and or like there's something we can't do online. And I feel like I hear what you're saying, Ruth, but it doesn't seem like it's enough for the travel. I don't think it makes it more convenient for the public, like our public meetings. So that's my sense of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I agree with all that, and maybe we can just leave open if there's some particular time we want to do it and we want to have a longer one, or, you know, maybe we have a longer, you know, one that's longer and we don't have another one.
And that's what I was going to say as well, Representative Wattenberg, was like, I remember before last year we had panels and things like that. And if we wanted to have a panel or something like that, and it could be conducive to doing that, you know, and we wanted to have it in person, just to have that type of representation and use OWL or something like that to just make sure it went really well. That would be great. But I'm with the majority. If we choose not to do them in person, that's fine with me.
Okay, I think our committee has come to consensus here, and we have decided to continue meeting virtually unless there seems to be some compelling reason to meet in person. Yes?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
With lead time.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So along those
Echo
lines,
needs to be dealt with somehow.
yeah, I'm not sure. It comes and goes. Weird.
Oh.
So I wouldn't mind changing the time of this meeting, and maybe I'll just do that in an email because that will probably be easier, but I just wanted to throw that out there that actually I originally chose this time or suggested this time because I thought students might want to join us. And since no student rep has joined our committee, during the day works better for me, but I will share an email, or I'll send an email and see if that is something that's interesting to anybody else. We don't need to discuss it now. Okay, so moving on, unless Ruth, we also started with updates. Did you have any updates related to assessment and accountability? Okay. So I thought we might take a little time to discuss takeaways from Donna's presentation at our May working session. And, you know, one of the things that Representative Patterson and I talked about not at our last meeting, but when I reported out about our meeting with OSSE leadership. We had talked about how do we reconcile differences, you know, where is the place and time that we reconcile differences that come up before the vote, so that ideally when we get to July working session and then the July vote, we are pretty much on the same page, right? And the response was, well, it's these working sessions that they're coming to. So between May and June, I think what we, you know, would benefit from is sort of reflecting on what we heard and what feedback we would give based on that, or what we would hope to see in June, so that leading up to that July vote, we are, you know, hopefully more or less aligned, or at least we are knowing what to expect, right? So so I guess I just want to emphasize that these working sessions are really key to our communication with Donna's team, where we reconcile differences, to use Representative Patterson's term. And I started to go back through the slides. And so there were some things that I did just want to raise that came up for me. But then I wanted to hear your thoughts on those things and also give you all an opportunity to weigh in as well. Any questions or thoughts before I jump in with that?
No, I'm just going to run downstairs to get those notes from that meeting. I'm going to go off camera 1 second.
Okay. So one thing, I think the big thing, I'm going to start with sort of the most broad issue to me. On the slides that show sort of what OSSE is planning to change, there are a lot of good revisions, I think, that we can get on board with. I think what has been, I don't know, striking to me from the beginning of this process is that I don't really see our resolution in it, right? Like, so my question broadly is, are we going to, we being the state board, so not just this committee, it's a question kind of for the members as well, but we can start here. Is that okay, right? Like, it seems like ASSE has taken our resolution and like, okay, thank you. These are the principles that we are following. And they are also not really tracking with our resolution, our recommendations. And yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is I hear a lot of good things about, the changes to attendance, changes to the way that maybe weights, I'm not sure if that's good or not, we can discuss that, are calculated, but I am not hearing a lot that really tracks with our resolution. I do see your hand, Representative Patterson. One more thing I just wanted to mention that I didn't get a chance to ask at the meeting, which was about support. And I don't really see in the principles, that slide that outlines sort of the guiding principles that they're using, so that this framework leads to support. So that's something that I was hoping to ask about, and that I would like to understand where that shows up, or if it shows up, if it's a priority. So those were some issues that came up for me. Jacques.
And what I was going to say, but you already explained them. I was going to ask, what particular areas, but you just explained that part. But the other aspect of my question and just statement, so to speak, is that one area we know where the resolution says one thing, but it has been brought out and made very clear that there is a summative score. There is not a summative rating, but there is a summative score. And I think that is one of the most contentious things. However, any particular member believes one way or the other, but that is something that was kind of stated, and how we're going to talk about that going forward, because that's something that she's stating already, that's going to be something that's in there, but that was not one of our recommendations. So that's a large piece. It is number one on our recommendations as something that we wanted to see not in there, but it is in there. Yeah. And so we can start having that conversation now. What does that look like? What does the conversation around it look like? Seeing that, we had a very clear recommendation on it, but they have a response to it, which is not within the recommendations. How does that conversation can start now sooner than later?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think probably Representative Wattenberg is going to maybe speak to that as well.
So sort of, but let me try to pose it a little bit in a different way. See, the way I think about it is, first of all, totally agree with what Representative Patterson said on a very big thing for us. They have so far been pretty unwilling, and granted, it's not the rating, but I think we were pretty clear that it was about the score, not just the rating, that so far there hasn't been a compromise on that. And I want to say, I think one possibility that is worth talking about is, as Jacques and I did in a Twitter thing the other day. I mean, I don't like it. I think it's very opaque. I think it's very misleading. I think it doesn't help. I think it's dumb, frankly. But all that said, let me see if I can.
Sorry, can I just clarify? You think what is dumb? The summative? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, just publishing that number, because I think it's so opaque and it doesn't tell people anything. It's misleading, it's confusing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of that said, I would be open to some kind of compromise that labeled it as such. It just said, these are the scores from a formula developed largely by the Department of Education that indicates based on this formula need of schools. I mean, it should be a really long, technical, boring title because that's what it is. And it should not go close to the front, and it shouldn't be treated equally with a lot of the more important things. I think in there, I might be able to go with some compromise. So I just want to say that. The second thing is on all of the identifying the 5%. What are the thing about the 5%, if we don't think about this as a summative or a ranking or these public scores, and we really just think about it as how do we really want to identify schools that are the most in need, right? That's the point. These schools are going to get federal dollars. Do these changes address making sure that the dollars are going to go to the schools most in need? And I think that's how we should be looking at these proposals from OSSE. I have to say, I have mixed feelings about them. And I'd like to hear more from people who represent schools where there's more of them identified. I don't feel like a super expert on it. I mean, I have some things to say from a policy perspective. So that's the second thing. I think it's super important. How are we going to identify these schools? That said, it's not a lot of schools. It's not a lot of money. The bigger thing is how are we going to support other schools? To Emily's point about the support. And so that's sort of a third thing, is the support. And the fourth thing is, I get that OSSE is sort of saying, we're only going to deal with the amendment now. We're not going to deal with any of the other things in the resolution, and that's all going to wait. Well, that's going to be a different state board. It's not going to have gone through the discussions that we went through. This board voted unanimously to adopt this resolution. And we need to have in the amendment a commitment from OSSE on a lot of those issues. We can talk about which ones, but for example, that there is going to be broad support, that there is going to be a climate indicator, that it will, I think that there's going to be a dashboard. I think we need to come to some agreement with them about a set of things that they're willing to make a commitment towards. Because speaking for myself, I'm not inclined to vote for it otherwise. So I'll just say that. It's totally, I get that they need to focus on the amendment, that's fine, but they can make some commitments. They need to be thinking about it. And that's what I'm prepared to vote on. So that's all.
That's really helpful, actually, Ruth. That clarifies a lot. Hold on.
And Representative Wattenberg, I know those who may be watching may be shocked at what I'm about to say, but I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I didn't see, there wasn't a part of what you just stated that I did not agree with. We've said from the beginning, from our very first meeting before I was even a board member, that we wanted indicators, not indictments. And I think we do start to talk about, if they're going to have a summative score, what does that look like so that it is not an indictment? And I agree again wholeheartedly on your second aspect about that, is about, so what does the dashboard look like? Because that is a major part of this. And I know that is a very big concern of everybody who wanted to get away from star ratings, so to speak, a rating. So we could tell the whole story. I heard that both from my position as a state board member and during my doctoral stuff when I was talking to people for my own dissertation. So we do need some commitment there that will happen. And I just agree with you, and I want to state that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Oh, geez. Thank you, Representative Patterson. Just knocked over some water. Sorry, Representative Reed, go ahead.
Yes, I'm just going to quickly move through my notes on some of the topics, and then just kind of still thinking about things through, or thinking things through. So I get, like, now OSSE is moving towards a score. But when kind of asked about what will be the components of the score, it still seems like it's the same ingredients that made the rating in regards to the formula. So I'm wondering if in the score if we're going to go for the score of 100, could we add other things to make this score more inclusive of maybe things that people were asking for, to, just kind of, because right now I'm just like, well, we'll have, if we use a similar formula or the 5 ingredients, then we'll still get almost the same thing. So I'm just wondering if there are other components that we can add to this 100. And also I would like to see, like, visualize, like in the slide, I don't see anything that says, like, shows me how the 100 is computed. Maybe that's what they're working towards. But it seems like we're almost in June. So will we even have, time to see that formula, how it could work? So that's kind of my only thing about that 100 is, like, what is in it and can we add more to it? I'm also a little hung up on the engagement around it. And I know it seemed like, I think the PACE engagement might have had the most people, like 25, which in the grand scheme of things, like, it's great that was a meeting with 25 folks, but we're a city of hundreds of thousands. So we have a lot of people to, a lot of ground to cover. As a state education agency, how do we incorporate more feedback into a pretty major decision that, again, my ward, if, in what is it, the 5%, we have 4 of the 8 schools that are highlighted as needing more support. So I'm happy that we are, like, trying to host a joint meeting today, but it just seems like, in the engagement, like, what can residents get? What I'm hearing from residents is, like, we participate in these things. We've said, what we wanted. We would like OSSI to kind of move the meter on what they're saying versus, like, here is some, pre-developed things, and we'll move the meter if you find some holes in it. But otherwise, this is what we're going to stick to. And I think that's the feedback that it would really reassure residents that they can see that, like, there's a change based on what they're saying. Okay, I'm gonna wrap some of this up. Talk about bottom, I talk about stakeholder engagement. I might be done. Okay, I think that's it for now. And I do thank Donna for being really accessible when she's coming to our meeting later today. But I think I was just looking through my notes from
that's great.
Our working session.
So actually, can I just clarify something that you said, Carlene, about seems like the same ingredients as before. So, I mean, there is a limited, number, or there's requirements that they have to include.
Yeah. But there's, I could use some clarity on. Requirements often feel like the floor or the base, like, this is what we just have to do. Like, can we add just more to this score of 100?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, that's
so don't take out. Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah, but my understanding, to go to Dr. Reed's point, my understanding is that there is the ones that have to be in there, and there's also that says that we pick 1 or 2 that go in there as well, from my understanding of reading the legislation or how that was supposed to work out. So I don't know if we have the answer to are they selecting those or are we selecting those?
And I think that's a good point, Jack. Like, does our engagement at all show possible suggestions for what those things that we could pick, what those things were? And I thought we had found some things that people were interested in being replacements.
Well, the climate.
Yeah, I think we know exactly how we prioritize everything from the work that Darren did. Mm-hmm. That if we were asked what was the things that people wanted to see most, we have an answer to that.
Yeah, Ruth has a question for Carlene.
Well, it's really about this, which is, I think by law, we can add any number of things to this. I don't think the law restricts what we can add to it. The law does say that anything we include, it has to be about the students. So, for example, we can't use climate indicators that reflect teachers or parents. It also has to reflect something where there's a meaningful difference across all the students. So you couldn't say, I actually think we were very close on in-school attendance, because that actually doesn't differ a lot across schools, as an example. So that's, I think, all the law says. So we could add more. So we could add all the things that we added, that we listed in our resolution. That's on the facts. my question back to you, Carlene, is I guess part of it for me is if you're putting together a list of criteria to use to identify your 5%, to some extent, that's a different set of criteria than I would put together to show the world in a dashboard, or even show the quality of a school, right? Need is different than school quality. So what are we trying to measure in this 5%? Are we trying to genuinely measure need? And what would that be versus something else? I mean, it may be a total overlap. I really thought it through that way, but I guess I end with, is there something that would give us information on the need of a school that's not currently in that formula? Because if there was, that's something really worth thinking about and trying to push for.
Ask that question again. Sorry, I missed the.
No,
very
so is there some indicator that really gets at school need, not more broadly school quality? And there's obviously a lot of overlap here, but that really gets at school need that's not in this current list. That's not in the current proposal from OSSI. Or is there something that is in that formula, some indicator that's in there that's so important that we really want it to count for a lot more? And the problem here is, if when you're counting for need, you're going to ask things like, what's the performance level? What's the attendance level? What's the growth level? I mean, a lot of the same things we ask, but we want to know it for need, but they also, if they get published as that general score, they have that indicting effect. So that's why I'm sort of like, are we trying to find indicators that really go at need? Or are we trying to find indicators that don't indict as much? But they may not be the same. I mean, or they may be the same. In other words, yeah.
Okay. Did you want Carlene to respond to some part of that?
Well, if she wants to. I mean,
it's a big question. I would need to sit and process that.
Yeah, you just put a lot out there. I mean, I think some good questions just about, or I think the point of like differentiating between need and quality is kind of what we've been trying to get at. I think at least part of what our resolution is trying to get at. But I do want
we got at it by saying we're not going to use,
Yeah, I know. All right, President Sutter. And then Representative.
Thank you. Sorry, I was going to join on video, but it looks like I can't now. So this is super helpful to hear everyone reflecting. Looks like I can join you now. There we go. Sorry, I got to go to an event, so I was still getting the face on. It's been super helpful to listen to you all reflect on the presentation and the things that are still not quite right, and which we have questions for ASEAN. Representative Gasoy, I'm particularly aligned with you on the question of supports, because I've tried to be mindful of OSSI making the determination between the report card and the amendment, but the ESSA plan is clearly about what the state is going to do to identify schools in need of support and then provide support for those schools. So that feels like something that I hope we will all push hard on, because that's critical to our resolution and clearly in the ESSA amendment. So that's something I hope we push hard to get answers on, and I will certainly raise it with Dr. Grant at our next meeting to make sure that we hear about it at the working session. The other thing I'm curious about is on the additional metrics we'd want to see. Are there things from our list or from any individual person's list that are not currently in OSSI's suggested set of components that are also not in OSSI's list of here's why we won't include them? So for instance, school climate is something they have talked about, and they've clearly heard about it from stakeholders, and it's in our resolution, but OSSI has said we're not putting it in the formula. Is there a Venn diagram for you all of things that are still available that we should put in that formula? Because that would also be something I'd want us to push on. So those are just my 2 reflections in listening to everything folks have said.
Can I, before, unless, Jacques, were you going to ask a question directly to anything Dr.
No, I was just going to say, and I can say it very quickly.
Okay.
It was kind of piggybacking on what Representative Waddingberg said, and then also what Representative Sutter said was getting to the metrics aspect of it, of really making sure we are do our due diligence of how things are being measured and what matters most to the people who responded to all of our surveys. It's very important to me to make sure that we do, be responsive to them. And then again, as President Sutter just said, is what other one that we really wanted in there that speaks to what our residents and respondents wanted in there. And climate is one of mine, because for the simple thing is, for a lot of people, data is data, but they want to hear some kind of qualitative something that allows them to weigh in some kind of way. So I was just wondering how that came into being, but that was my statement about metrics and those things and how they're weighted.
I just put a summary I made for myself, if this is helpful, in the chat. And I would say that well-rounded education, some indicator of that, teacher data, and I mean, the others I think are less likely. I think we wanted to talk about alternatives to park, but I think some of these, I mean, to your point, President Sutter, about climate, I think one of the things we're hoping for is that there'll be a commitment to looking at it down the road. Like, we understand it's not going to be in this one, but I think it would help us if there is some acknowledgement that's, I mean, they've acknowledged that this is something they've heard is very popular. So I think that's what we're hoping there. And then I do think they have spoken to the teacher data as well and said similar things around reliability. So again, I think, if they are here, what I would be interested in terms of, your follow-up, I guess, is in their feedback sessions, are they hearing some of these things too? And are these things that they are willing to consider down the road as well?
Yeah.
I think that's what we could hope for. And then I had a question. Oh, yes. So like you were saying with the support that you think we should push on that. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about what that might look like. I mean, so you've said you will bring it up with OSSI leadership, which I think is great. Are there other things you think we should do?
Yeah, so I mean, there's one other thing that's, I think that would be helpful for maybe another memo. Like, what does it look like in other states where we think that they're doing a good job describing in their ESSA plans how they're supporting schools? Like, we heard from, forgive me, Oklahoma. Is that who we heard from?
Yeah,
We heard from Oklahoma about how they provide supports to schools. I
It was
think it would be
Nebraska.
helpful.
What's that?
Sorry, Nebraska. Thank you. I think it would be helpful to note a little bit about what we think that would look like if done well. The other thing I wonder about, and this is my own lack of knowledge about the ESSA plan. So I'm giving voice to this on the record, but I don't know the right answer to it or whether it's possible. Some of the things that are difficult to disaggregate by school at the student level, which is required for that formula for identification, still feels like it might be possible for the state to disaggregate by LEA. And that might be interesting. So like, could OSSI publish as part of the state ESSA reporting access to well-rounded education by LEA and whether it's even or uneven, right? So I'll give one example. Every DCPS school is now mandated by law to have a librarian. That is not something that applies to the charter LEAs. So it would be interesting to see if the state might talk about access to well-rounded education on a couple of dimensions and think about reporting it by LEA, even where they can't disaggregate it by student subgroup by school. Because there it's hard. Like, how could I disaggregate access to social studies by student by school? But I probably could disaggregate if a school had if LEAs had access to music evenly across schools or unevenly. That's why, like, this is very fuzzy for me, but I'm thinking about how we might push on this as part of ESSA, but think about it not at a school level, but at a state level. I think it gets at some of what I tried to talk about like a year ago about unequal access to resources. Like, that might be the right place to put it, not at the school level, but do LEAs ensure that this happens across schools within the LEA? And then the other question on that front is on the teacher data. Like, is there a way for that to happen too at the state reporting at LEA level, and then thinking about how that helps us understand information? Like, it's hard to disaggregate by student subgroup who gets access to what teachers, but it would be really interesting to look at teacher experience and how that is distributed equally or unequally across LEAs and equally or unequally across schools within an LEA. So anyway, those are the two other points. Now I apologize. I have to hop. I have a phone call that I'm 10 minutes late for, but this was wonderful. Thanks for letting me, as always, listen in. And
Can I just say, I hope that when you talk to people, you'll bring up the commitments, the importance of putting those commitments into that initial amendment.
yeah,
And then the last thing I just want to say before you hop is, I very much like what you're talking about. To me, it sounds very similar to the indicator system. That is, we're going to show, you're saying at the LEA, not the school, but we're going to show what the resources are. That's the whole goal. So it would be, if that's can be connected to the amendment, let's figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
Because I think what Aussie is saying is that doesn't connect to the amendment if it's not the individual. So I'm all for trying to figure that out.
yeah, I'll do a little research and see what I can find out. Thank you all.
Thank
Bye.
you. Have a good rest of your night. Is that a current hand, Ruth, or?
Well, it was, but that was before I realized that Jessica was leaving. I think it was to respond to her.
Okay, no, I think actually those are really interesting ideas she raised, and worth thinking about. And I mean, I think her question is a good one of like, what else is, the climate measure and finding the right climate measure is sort of the main indicator that isn't being included, or, that they've been really clear about. The others are they're a little fuzzier too, for me as well. So that is just something to think about. If there's a way that, if we feel strongly about any of these, I think we need to get a lot clearer on, what that might look like, or what we're actually advocating for.
Wait, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. We're advocating for these, and they're saying no. So what more do you want us to do?
Right, but I think, so, for instance, with the climate indicator, we did a memo, we have shown that other states are doing this, we're asking them to make a commitment to follow through on this, because it's clear that this is something that's worthwhile and that folks want it. If we are to, I feel like we're advocating strongly for that. I don't hear us advocating at the current time as strongly for some of the other ones, like well-rounded education and teacher data.
Oh, I am. I mean, I'm totally.
Okay.
I think the reason the climate one came up is that I think we all recognize that that requires a lot of lead time. And so the idea was to get them to commit to it, understanding that it probably, and it costs money, right? There's a big research project attached to that. For me, that's why that has been more talked about than the others. It's not that the others aren't also important. So
given that, what are your thoughts? Again, this is back to my original question. I feel like we need clarity leading up to the June meeting and beyond on, like, what are the deal breakers, right? Like, what would make this a proposal we would not vote for? Or, we can frame it positively too, like, what needs to be in there in order for us to vote for it. So Ruth, are you saying that it needs to also acknowledge those two other indicators I just mentioned, the teacher?
Well, and the dashboard, I mean, I guess, I would like to see commitments that they are going to do a good number of these things. For sure, a dashboard with some detail based on what we said about what it would look like. A climate indicator for sure. And, you know, 3 out of the other 5 or whatever it is. To me, that's what I mean, I absolutely the well-rounded education, absolutely the teacher retention.
But do you think they don't take as much time to develop like a well-rounded education indicator?
Well, I mean, one way you could do that we've always talked about is, you could just publish, and we could say this, you could just publish for the elementary schools, their weekly schedule. So you could see how much time do they give to these things.
See, I don't think,
and
I guess as we're talking about it, my sense is that is quality and not necessary. Well, maybe it is need. I don't know. Yeah.
well, I mean, we're going back and forth here. Now I'm not talking about the need, although it all relates to need. We're
I mean,
talking about what are the commitments? The commitments.
Yeah, but we're identifying the 5% that are most in need with these indicators, right? That's what
Oh, I thought we'd move the conversation. I'm sorry. I thought we were talking about the commitment, other commitments beyond this. So I take back what I just said.
because this proposal is about that, right? Like it's about the framework. So that's what I'm asking, like what needs to be in there. Yeah, and we can,
This is the list of, this is from our resolution. This is the list of things that we want
yeah, so this is not,
dashboard and more generally, it's not what goes in the 5%.
no, I just put it there in case it's helpful. So it's in order our point, like the points in our recommendation section of our proposal of our resolution. That's all. But number 4, 5, 6, I mean, a lot of them there, I have them highlighted, and I can, but I don't think there are a lot more that we were proposing for the the meaningful differentiation formula. I think that was it. So any other conversation on this? Any other thoughts or questions or quandaries? Okay, so going back up to our next item is just the research chart and memo. So the memo is pretty much done, and I was in conversation with Darren earlier today because I discovered a 2020 memo that I found really helpful on climate measures. And so Darren, are you in a place where you can kind of talk a little bit about some of the, I don't know, differences that you found or progress? Because one of the things I noticed straight away in, the 2020 memo, it names 8 states that used a climate measure in their accountability framework. And then our most recent one names 12, I believe. So we can say, that this is a measure that's being used more, or that it's, the trend is upward, right, on this. So that's useful. Darren, was there anything else that you think we should pay attention to, whether it's in comparison to the first one or otherwise, or are you not there right now?
I'm here. Apologies if you hear Curious George in the background.
That's okay. George.
I'm like, have one eye on Theodore and one eye on the camera. But I think you're absolutely right that states following ESSA, I think states are now exploring school climate since that 2020 memo. I mean, the Education Commission of the states, they offered which states use school climate in their accountability frameworks. So there's 12, so a few more than what was in that 2020 memo from the state board. I think looking more into areas of what other states might be considering at the moment. I mean, what was reported in that memo is just states that have already committed to a school climate survey in their framework, but there might be other states that are in consideration of that. Another area is, and I just found this article today. I have to actually like look up and share that link after I go on mute. But there are other states that are already not states. I found a school district that's switching the school survey itself. I think switching from Panorama to another one. So maybe looking at not just states that use school climate surveys, but also any states that might be changing things up after using it for a while. That might be another area to look into. Reaching out to ECS to see if there's any updates, like any possible policy briefs that are coming down the pike on what states are doing with that. And I'm trying to think of what else. I can't think of anything at the moment. There was an ask from you all on the possibility of using just a few school climate questions, like 5 questions as a temperature check. And I reached out to National Center of Education Statistics, NCES, on what that looks like. And they mentioned that wouldn't be good for a high stakes framework, but like for a check, something like that, that might be helpful. Give me just a moment. I'll be right back. But I also wanted to note on the well-rounded education discussion, an email I sent a while back on just OSCE completing a preliminary landscape analysis of best practices and course data collection and existing state of course data. So just that I think that might be an area to also look into around well-rounded education. I didn't want to go off course with school climate, but I think, yeah.
No, that's helpful. Thank you, Darren. I mean, I'll share the email that Darren shared today from I think it was from AIR. Yeah, I can't remember which one, but I didn't understand actually, Darren, I know he just left, but I didn't understand their rationale for why the temperature check wouldn't be valid. So that's something I want to like understand better, because you could use it across all schools consistently, and therefore it should, even if it's just 5 metric or indicators. Yeah, I don't see why that would make a difference, why you need more indicators.
Yeah, that's what I wondered.
Yeah, go ahead, Ruth, sorry.
So one thing that would be interesting, and this does relate to the support and it connects it to, is I know Jack Schneider's group. I think that's right about Jack Schneider's group. And I know the Chicago Consortium were both engaged in figuring out how to connect their findings much more with providing support. Because I think in both places they actually had the information, but the schools weren't actually using it. I mean, one of the ideas was the schools would use it, and to some extent they were, but kind of vague, and they were really trying to get schools to do more of that and figure out how to make it take more and what kind of resources would be needed for that. So that's sort of very relevant to the support piece, obviously.
Could I also add one other thing on the school climate piece, is also exploring how other states approach introducing the school climate at the state level, how much that costs, how, like what pilots look like, things like that. Maybe that might, does that sound like something that might be helpful as a crosswalk?
Sorry, I was looking for something. Say again.
Would it be helpful also in, if we do pursue further research in school climate, like statewide school climate surveys, looking into how other states approached it in terms of how long it took to pilot it and then fully implement it, how much it cost to do, but that might be another area to explore.
Yeah, could be. I wonder
And
if it's,
especially just if we picked out the couple or few that really spoke to us, because as I recall looking at those, some of them were very narrow. And some of them, not exactly what we were talking about, but some of them were great. And so I'd want to focus on those.
okay. Did you have something else, Ruth?
No.
Okay. Jacques or Carleen, anything on this? Okay. All right, looking at time. Thank you, Darren. So I think, oh, the only other thing with the memo and the chart, we're just going to share it and encourage members to read it and put it on our website so it's there, and share it with whoever you think would benefit from it, including council members, whoever else.
And it's going to OSSI too, or it's just our
Darren,
home?
we're CCing OSSI, right?
I don't believe so. I think it was just something that was shared on the state board website and to shared widely with members. And I think there were, I'm not sure what other discussions were had about around sharing it with OSSI or just.
I think, yeah, we can ask leadership if they feel comfortable sharing it with Dr. Grant, and then, but basically when
Or with
Representative,
Donna, I mean, Donna should have it. It's just
she
that
should have it as, but when I presented it as a gift to Dr. Grant, she was taken aback. I think she didn't know what it was like. I think anyway, she was like,
In fairness, I think it was just that because it wasn't on
Blindsided
our
her.
agenda, it kind of caught her off guard. I think she does want to know what it is and everything like that. She just was caught off guard because we kind of didn't say that was something we were going to present them as a gift in the meeting.
Yeah. So hopefully we can do that. I don't think there's, yeah, we're not, I think she took it as like, we're telling them they have to do this. Whereas that is the one thing this particular memo doesn't do. I mean, we may say, in order to get to yes in July, these are the things we're hoping for, but that's not in the memo actually. So, any other, if you have
I think it's worth leadership sharing. Just to make them aware. And I agree with Jock. I think it was just more of if they didn't know it was coming down the pipe. So
yeah,
we tried that way and then see what the response is.
Yeah.
And I don't want us to leave this subject without, us stating to them in some way, somehow, to come right back to what we started with, was how are we going to reconcile things that are coming out, in June. In that meeting, when she presents, whether we do that in the working meeting or any other place, that we definitely want to know how differences will be worked out. Whether that's leadership, whether that's the committee, but we need to know between June and July, when there's a vote and they're expecting a vote in July, there has to be some type of way that we say, okay, you've heard from us, we've heard from you. Now, this is how we would vote. This is what we would need to vote on in favor of. I just think that's very important that gets worked out so we don't come to July and it's just a free for all.
Yeah, and I think you're bringing up a really important point about the period between June and July. That's the pivotal time. But I mean, that's what's kind of funky about this communication thing is I would just, in the interest of saving OSSI time, it feels like it would be useful to them to know sort of where a majority of the board stands, in terms of like, this conversation we're having, or that we did have, you know, about what we would need to see in order to vote yes. That's all. I mean, I don't want it to come across as an ultimatum. It's more just like, this is the expectation. So anyway, I don't know if we can convey that in some way. If leadership could convey that, maybe we can come up with just a, you know, really brief memo of some kind or letter. Yeah, Ruth, is that
And it could be as simple as asking in their next meeting from our president and our vice president, like, you know, there are some things where they would like to know how we're going to reconcile different things. And these are some of the concerns that they have in that particular meeting, and getting some clarity on that. It could be that simple, because we're not trying to come across as being, you know, adversarial, but, you know, we do have constituents that have told us exactly how they feel, each one of us. And we want to be responsive to them and make sure that it's reflected in how this all comes out at the end and what we would need for it to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it would be helpful to take the notes from today and kind of try to draft something, and also get, you know, input from the rest of the board, see if they agree with, you know, what we've come up with. And then maybe go from there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, to go back earlier, I mean, I put out sort of, here's what it would take for me to vote for this. And Jacques was like, yeah, I totally agree. So I
Right.
think we need to figure out, you know, get that on paper, I guess, and really say, yeah, we really agree on this. This is our commitment to each other and to our constituents, and be clear on that. And then talk to others on the board. I mean, I think most others on the board would be pretty receptive to, if we agreed that that's what we're going to do, that they would be agreeable to. So I think that's one direction. But the other thing, and I want to come back to something I asked earlier, now it's clearer to me. If we don't vote, if we don't vote for this, that means they don't change the amendment, right? So another issue is, does it matter? See, when I look at what they're doing in the new one versus what they did in the old one, to me, it's not a big deal. More or less the same schools are going to get identified. Because of the weighting, you might send more, potentially you could pull some schools into the 5% that have way fewer at-risk students. I can't, it's hard for me to imagine that that would actually happen. Like, you might get a lower score because your non-at-risk students aren't counting as much, but I don't think it would pull you into the 5%, all which is, it could not possibly. All which is to say, the schools that are going to get support, I cannot imagine that that is going to change by almost anything with this new set of indicators versus the old set of indicators. So that tells me I don't have a lot of need to vote for the new amendment. What's the point? Right? So to me, these other things really are very important, and there's not a countervailing reason to take the amendment. So I want to make sure that's true. And people, again, I don't feel like I'm the right one to look at this, but do people feel like the new stuff in these indicators makes some big difference to who gets identified for support, and does it matter? Because that's an important thing to know. I don't think it does, but I don't know.
And the other thing I would add as well is, when I think about support, is Mendelson's legislation right now as identifying not so much as the student, but the school for at-risk funding, which kind of falls in line with this, looking at percentages of schools that will receive certain amount of support. I know they're very distant in the sense of, one is a federal mandate, and this is a legislation that he's putting forward in a budget item. And, you know, that can change with every budget, but that is something that's in the back of my mind as I think about support for schools, specifically being an East of the River resident, and knowing that there have been schools that have historically not received what they needed. And to speak to some of the issues that we've always brought up, when a kid transfers or get put back into a school from a charter school and the funds don't follow them, but they have a higher percentage of at-risk students. All of this is kind of swimming around in my head, and I'm trying to reconcile it. Not saying I have the answer right now, but all of that is kind of swimming around in my head. Is when we talk about support, how do we do that? and how do we identify that and who's doing what? Is it ESSA? Is it us on the city level from the council? Those are the kind of things that are kind of swimming around my head. Again, I don't have the answer to it, but those are the things as I think about support.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about the Mendelssohn piece. Okay. So I am looking at the time. We are at time, but I did just want to note where we are in the work plan. I want to make sure everyone knows that we have decided at this point not to do the well-rounded education research. We're putting it off till next fiscal year. That said, something that Jacques and Darren and I have talked about is, oh, well, we put together a proposal to the AU students and we didn't win the bid, to have them look at other studies at the district and school level that in some way capture, well-rounded education. And I think that's something we may still be able to do. Darren was saying maybe one of our fellows could work on putting something together, and just, it doesn't have to be super comprehensive. What I was thinking is it'd be helpful just to see some, like maybe up to 5 different approaches to capturing that. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or questions on that. So that would be just informing then the proposal we would write for the vendor that we would be engaging in the fall. Does that sit well with folks? And am I right about that, Darren, that that's something we can do?
Yeah, I believe we could ask one of the fellows to help with that work.
Okay. Okay. I think that was it. Or close enough to it. But I will, I think this was really helpful, actually. I mean, I think that we have a solid plan for sharing, pulling together the sort of non-negotiables, if you will, that we came up with here today, and sharing those with the rest of the board as such. And going forward from there about, how leadership wants to share those with us.
Can I say, I would not initially write up a list of non-negotiables and send it to the board. I think I'd want to take them and talk to people, different board members about it. And we could all have different conversations that's how I would do it.
So you're saying not to send it as like here's a memo of our non-negotiables. It's more, we discussed this, more informal is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say it's sort of like the way we did the resolution, come up with a draft that we, the 4 of us, feel comfortable with, use that as the basis for soliciting additional feedback. And then based on that, come up with a draft that we would feel comfortable, pushing out and saying, we think this reflects a consensus across all of us.
Yeah, and I would like to almost see like 2 visuals, kind of like the visual of what we asked for in our resolution and what's being provided. And then that second visual that President Sutter was mentioning about, what was it? She mentioned like a Venn diagram of like what we can, like what is out there that we actually can do that speaks to some of those components that OSSI should be considering to make our conversation. Because in my head, I'm just like, I want like something, if that makes sense. Like I want to see the needle move, and I think sometimes our conversation is limited to what we know. And if there's more things that we can just, add on that might be reflective of what constituents are saying, like let's do that. So I really like that Venn diagram idea. So like maybe just 2 visuals of like, here's what we propose, here's what OSSI, of those things proposed, OSSI has met, like even like a checkbox, and like here's things that aren't, and then like here are the possibilities of what we've asked for and what we actually can achieve, and hopefully OSSI can meet us somewhere in the middle so that we can get some agreement on something.
And I like that approach, Dr. Reed, in the sense of my biggest thing as we continue to collaborate with OSSI is not to be confrontational, but to show that we can work together, that we can have a great working relationship. I think this is one of the biggest things that are coming up first for OSSI under Dr. Grant's leadership. And so I think, you know, if we can get a win-win for both groups and show, you know, everybody that we can work together on these type of things, I think that's really good. And by doing that, by giving a kind of like that diagram thing, that helps us to kind of give that narrative that we do work well together, that, you know, we can get some things that we need, you know, knowing that it is a negotiation thing, but that we can actually work together on things that are very important to our constituents. And I think that's really what they want to see.
Yeah, because I mean, I think just and I know we're over time, but just the feeling I'm getting from people that I've talked to who are like, we're giving feedback and it just feels like nothing changes. I just want to make sure that they're giving feedback to what can be changed. And then sometimes it's just parking lot and the feedback that we can't apply to that and then move it to other initiatives. But we gotta like make sure that folks feel like what they're saying is valued and heard and reflected in our system.
Two quick things, sorry, before we go. One is, I mean, the feedback basically is in the resolution, right? I mean, I don't think there's anything major that came up that isn't in our list of things. We should check and make sure, but I think that's the case so that the resolution reflects the feedback. So the Venn diagram can be what's in the OSSI proposal and what's in the resolution. Is that what you mean?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I mean, like we have
Yeah,
500, 600 people that we collected feedback from, and we need to honor that. Like, no shade.
No, I'm totally
they haven't been able to quote that number to me on engagement. So it's kind of like, well, we did our, thing, and I understand that the engagement is different, but we need to honor the 500 and 600 people that we, were harassing with surveys, interrupting, going to their meetings, doing all this stuff. And showing them like, hey, your feedback is valued because we moved the needle in the framework based on what you said. And I mean, OSSI just hasn't given us those numbers of engagement yet, of the 500, 600 people engaged. So it's kind of like, can you meet us where the data that we collected, even though I know that data is.
And that's important because, it may well come back, what it indicates that we engage more people than they probably have engaged. And we need to be responsive and indicate that look, this is what you heard, this is what we heard. So let's reconcile that. Again, I'm going back to what we started with. How do we reconcile that and give the proper weight to both of our engagements?
All right. And my last thing, this is really about asking for the commitments, is I think one thing that's important, why is really important to me to have these commitments, and I think it's worth saying, is I did this vote before, Jacques knows that, and we were made a lot of promises and not one was kept. I mean, we were made promises about a growth score. We were made promises, it wasn't about climate, but it was about something like climate. And we were made, they didn't make a lot of promises, but the few they made, not one was kept. And I think that's really important. And maybe the staff can just go back and sort of read the resolutions that said we were going to get this stuff done, and then it never got done.
Amen, amen, and amen. All the way to the task force. I was on a task force and we gave recommendations at the end of the task force that were written up and they still have not been responded to.
Yeah.
So amen.
And sorry, before we go, Carlene, you said you want two visuals. One was the Venn diagram. What was the first one?
Just kind of the visual. Here's what we asked for in our resolution, and here, like almost like a check mark next to items that OSSI will incorporate in the whatever what they're coming up with. Is a way to kind of present to members of here's what we asked for, here's what they're presenting, and then here are the possibilities. As just a different approach to instead of just providing like a really paragraphed memo, but more of a visual that people can kind of look and like, oh, okay.
Like a side by side.
Yeah, or even like an up and down with the intro, but I think the visual component helps organize a little better. And it also comes up, for me, I would think, it takes away from that like lecture aspect that seems like could possibly.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Darren, I had one last question, which is OSSI mentioned all of those task forces they engaged, the principal task force and the teacher task force. Did the SBOE attend any of those? Were we invited?
I'm double checking right now to see if we had folks sit in on that. Give me just a moment.
I don't think we saw that in the schedule, right? Like that was not part of the schedule they sent over.
No, we didn't. It was parent groups, education, advocacy groups.
I mean, that's a genuine question. I wonder why, I mean, if it was just a privacy thing or. Because, yeah, I guess that's a question for leadership too, is like, are they going to publish? I guess they have to, right? They have to publish the results of the feedback for transparency's sake.
I would hope so, but I think Representative Kasoy, a lot of the times I think why we weren't invited is that I remember in the very outset that she was like, of course we can attend these things, but they didn't want our thought process bleeding into what they were trying to obtain from them if we attended with some of it. But it would be great if they could report out on that, since we respected their wish not to kind of stuff on them.
But I don't see why for instance, I mean, basically they invited us to the added engagement sessions, the ones that we requested. That's what I'm realizing now, like the ed councils and maybe a couple of the others, but not to their original ones with the groups and I think that's true. I guess the PAVE one we were invited to, but not the principal one. I'm sure there's reasons. I just am curious. Okay. I think we have a clear sense of what we need to do before June. So yay. Thank you all for your time. And I'll be in touch soon.